We knew that we couldn't be together. We knew that we wanted to provide for our child. And I think what it really was for both of us was the idea of giving our child two parents who loved each other, a mother and a father who were united.
Welcome to the Straight Talk on Life Issues podcast. I'm Victor Nieves, joined as always by Brad Mattis, president of Life Issues Institute. We have a really special program for you today. In honor of National Adoption Month in November, we know that being pro-life is about more than just the gestational period. Everybody lives a full life, hopefully, and adoption is definitely a part of that for very many people.
Yeah, you're right. Adoption does impact not just the people involved, but it impacts future generations, because when a woman chooses adoption over abortion, that child is born, grows up, likely gets married, has other children, and the cycle of life continues. So we need to be aware, Victor, just how much one adoption will impact this world.
Absolutely. And it seems like so many of the pro-abortion radicals, they try to paint a picture to women who are in a hard, scary situation that abortion is the only choice. Well, abortion is not the only choice. There are other options out there, adoption being one of them. That's a choice that everybody can live with in a quite literal sense.
Yeah, and this is something I've said before many times, but it's such an important thing to talk about. And that's when a woman chooses adoption. She's got so many choices before her. She can pick out the geographic location of the parents, their religious background, their financial income, whether there are siblings in the family. She's really in control. And then she can have a closed adoption, or she can have an open adoption, or anything in between. And the reality is, Victor, that adoption is the most pro-choice option a woman could ever face.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And as we'll talk about a little bit more in greater detail with our guests, adoption has the potential to be such a tremendous blessing to everyone involved, to the greater family. Even, going on, I can speak from a little bit of experience here as an uncle. And I can say, what a blessing adoption has been to not just my sister, but to our entire family, grandparents. It's just such a wonderful blessing, and a tremendous blessing oftentimes to the child. But Brad, we'll be able to talk about that, like I said, in much greater detail with our fantastic guests that we have. First of all, we have Dr. Kimberly Henkle. She's the founder and executive director of Springs of Love, which obviously helps a lot in this regard. We also have her husband, Greg Henkle. We'll love to get his perspective as a man, getting what's been like for them. And then we have Kate Stapleton, who has a very unique, a very interesting story as an author, a harpist. But for today's conversation, she's also a birth mother. So she can tell us what it's like from the perspective of someone who's been in that scary situation, but chose an option that everyone lives through. I want to thank everyone for coming on the show. We have such a great conversation ahead.
Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome you to the program and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to do so.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. We're so excited to be here.
Kimberly, tell me about Springs of Love.
When my husband and I got married and struggled with infertility, it was a big surprise for us. And what resulted from that struggle was a ministry was birthed called Springs in the Desert. And that ministry was to really help accompany couples who were struggling with infertility. We ended up adopting, and we felt like we didn't want to really conflate that ministry. Like, we didn't want to add that component of adoption to the infertility ministry, because we feel that it's not just people struggling with infertility who are called to adopt. So we started Springs of Love primarily to educate and equip and encourage to really discern and live out that call to foster and adopt. We have a Springs of Love video series, and there's these beautiful foster and adoption stories. We have this wonderful videographer, and he is an Emmy award-winning videographer. So he does such a beautiful job with these stories. So we have these stories that people can just watch, less than 10-minute long videos telling different perspectives. Foster family, a foster to adopt family, adoptive families, birth parents, a birth mother story we have.
Well, stories are the most effective way to get a point across. And those are the kinds of messages that people really remember. Now, Kate, your story is somewhat different than many others out there. Can you share it with us?
Sure. When I was 21 years old, I got pregnant unexpectedly. I was in a really transitional place in my life and I was really torn. I did a ton of praying and contemplation and ended up deciding to place my child for adoption. It was an open adoption, which was a concept that I hadn't even heard of at that point. I think I read a book about open adoption a few weeks before my daughter was born. So I was kind of going into something that I had no idea what it was going to be like. She grew up on the other side of the country. I was on the East Coast. She was on the West Coast, but we did have contact over the years. I was able to visit her a few times. Her family came to my wedding when I got married. And then when she was looking at colleges, she ended up looking at a college that was about 45 minutes from where we live here on the East Coast. And so she attended college for 4 years. She just graduated last year. And during that time, she spent a lot of time with us. So it's just been really amazing the way that God has kind of directed this story.
Kate, how has Bridget's adoptive mother handled the open adoption and the considerable communication between the two of you?
Her parents are amazing. Like I was always struck by that from the time that I met them. They are really just incredibly open, confident, rooted people. She's the oldest of 7 children. So they've adopted 7 children and every situation is totally different with birth parents, but they kind of led the way with openness. I feel like I was less open to openness. I actually was planning on a closed adoption initially. I didn't think I would want to visit. I wanted pictures and letters. I felt like it would be too challenging emotionally to actually visit a child that I had placed for adoption. So I feel like their sort of serenity has always been a real inspiration to me, even how I deal with adoption with my own children. So I have 6 children at home now. And their openness has always been really inspiring.
Well, what specifically made you decide to place your child for adoption?
I was not finished with college. I was in the middle of moving. I didn't have a job. The relationship with the birth father, it was the end of our relationship and we were broken up and knew that there was no way that we could raise a child together. So I initially felt very strongly like I would parent. I'm the oldest of 9 kids. I know how to take care of kids. I love kids. I love children. But the birth father and I did a lot of research together. It was like the very beginning of the internet. So we actually went to the library and like scrolled out microfiche, like went through old newspaper articles but we did a ton of research about single parenting and outcomes for kids. And we did both feel really strongly. We knew that we couldn't be together. We knew that we wanted to provide for our child. And I think what it really was for both of us was the idea of giving our child 2 parents who loved each other, a mother and a father who were united and loving to each other and could be loving to a child. So I knew that I could be a great mom, but I couldn't be 2 parent. And the birth dad knew that he wasn't going to be able to be there. He was really young. And so that was what was really the deciding factor. You know, it was something we really grappled with and wrestled with and prayed with. And it was a really tough decision.
Well, it's commendable that he was part of the process to decide on adoption. That's not always the case. Does he have any role in Bridget's life?
Yeah, he was actually at the wedding. He attended her wedding. He walked her mom down the aisle. So that was really special. He's had a much more limited role than I have. I think he has visited, though. He visited when she was growing up. He actually, when she was turning 7, visited her and wrote a song with her. He's also a musician. So that was the first song she ever wrote was on his guitar. It was about her little sister getting gum from the store, I think. But he has definitely always kept in touch, always gotten information. And again, he was able to walk her mom, her adoptive mom, down the aisle for her wedding, which was really special.
And Greg, I'm really glad to have you part of the program because it's very important that fathers are represented in this story.
Thank you.
What are some of the challenges that you both face being an adoptive parent?
Yeah, some of the challenges, I guess, that I faced as a man was just not knowing anybody that had adopted. I didn't have any friends that adopted. It was all new to me when Kimberly said, well, let's consider adopting. And that was kind of a surprise.
Kimberly?
Knowing where to start, like that was a huge thing. Because especially, I think a couple struggling with infertility, you can just get stuck in that, like, well, let's just keep trying. Let's just keep trying. And there's also this real grief that you have going through infertility. And you can start to feel like adoption is sort of a second place thing, that this is, well, a fallback. Well, we can't get pregnant, so we'll just adopt. And, it's not really the same thing, but it's the best we can do. And I think that mindset is so false. Like, we've come to see, like, that is so wrong. I guess one of the most dangerous things is for somebody to just tell somebody, well, why don't you just adopt? And I think a lot of times, you're dealing with the grief of infertility, like it's a cyclical grief, right? Every month it's that letdown and that letdown and that letdown. And then if you start opening that doors towards adoption, you might have those doors shutting and failed adoptions. And we experienced that as well. We started out down that path, and there was a baby that was born, and I flew out to Reno, Nevada to be there for the birth of the baby. And we got there and everything fell apart. The state got involved, took the baby into foster care. And here I was like, well, but we're supposed to adopt the child. And they're like, no, this child's going into foster care. And it was this big fiasco. And I never even got to see the baby. And I was just absolutely devastated and heartbroken. And that's, after having so much struggle, right, with the infertility, it's like, am I ever going to be a mother? Am I ever going to be a mother? And then to have this happen. So it can feel very overwhelming, right, to even step out on that path. So that's one of the reasons why we have Springs in the Desert, is to really help couples deal with that grief of the infertility and move beyond it, like really go through, enter into it, allow Jesus to be in there with you in that grief, see Jesus with you, that he's with you, he's healing your heart. He has a beautiful plan of fruitfulness for your marriage.
Greg, first of all, how many children have you adopted?
Yeah, we've adopted 4.
And of those children, the children that you've adopted, how do you share with them that they are adopted? Because that's a question many potential adoptive parents probably have in their minds.
So 2 of the 4 are boys, actually, we fostered to adopted. So they came right from the hospital. Our first, Anthony, we got a call, and we actually were fortunate enough to go and visit him in the hospital on the day he was born. And unfortunately, we couldn't take him home that day, but we took him home 2 days later. And we had a similar experience with our youngest son. We went to the hospital and picked him right up. I believe we took him home that day. With we have twin girls that Kimberly gave a talk at our church called, the title of the talk was "Every Child is a Gift," I believe. At the end of the talk, a grandmother came up to her and said, basically, she had been helping her 2 granddaughters, twin granddaughters, for about 5 or 6 months. And she was, I think, in her 60s at the time. And she was just so exhausted. And she said that your talk really inspired me. And she said, I was wondering if you would consider adopting these children. Unbeknownst to me, I was kind of coordinating the event at the church that night. Kimberly said, well, I said that we agreed that we would adopt these twin girls. And I'm like, oh, that's a surprise to me. The 2 girls were brought over to Anthony, who was like 6 months at the time. And
16 months.
16 months. Okay. And they had a play date. And we just said, we're going to see how it goes. And Anthony just had a ball with the girls. And I think my wife was just super impressed how they all got along. And Anthony now had 2 playmates, and he was really excited. And so with that, we just think a few months later, we went down to the courthouse, and the birth parents assigned over the rights to us. And it was an easy process.
I wanted to go back to when you asked about how do we talk about the children. The most important thing is to always talk about it with your children. So I started talking about it to our son, Anthony, when he was in my arms, our very first child we brought home from the hospital. I'm like rocking him in the chair, and I'm just like, your birth mama loves you so much that she couldn't take care of you. I was talking about it to him, and it was so hard for me to even talk about it, but it was for me to get used to being able to talk that way. Because when I brought him home, I felt like he's mine. Like I love this child. And with everything in my being, I wanted it to be that he came out of my body, that he was like, I wanted that so badly, but I had to realize like, no, this is a different story. And I need to honor the story, and I need to honor his birth mother who went through the 9 months and the heartache of losing him, which is a total heartache. We talk about the heartache of losing a child to death. We talk about that, but we don't really talk about the difficulty of a woman choosing an adoption plan, and that there is a lot of grief that is involved. And we need to honor the birth mothers and for their sacrifices.
So in talking with your children that they are adopted, what is some of the terminology that you've used?
Well, I think one thing we stress a lot being Christian is we say God is our Father, and we explain, of course, Jesus. And Jesus was always God from the very beginning, but at a certain point in history, he was incarnated, became man, and God assigned him a foster father, and that was Joseph. And so we explain foster father that Jesus is God, his father is God the Father, but also he had a foster father, and his role was really to provide for Jesus while he was on earth. And of course, when he was a baby, he needed someone to take care of him and to teach him the trades and teach him how to be a man. And so we talk about the role as a foster father. And just with our youngest son, John Paul, it was kind of nice. He had three older siblings that he could look to that shared a similar situation. So the big kids learned a lot from him, from his experience. And they said, wow, that was kind of like us. When we came into your house, the light bulb began to go on in their mind, like, this is what happened to us. And then John Paul could look to them and say, well, they were in the same situation. So we have always been honest with them and explaining what it is. I think Kimberly, as she's grown spiritually, she's realized that there's a need to reach out to the birth mom, that there's a lot of suffering involved with that, in that they've had to sacrifice to bring the child into existence, of course, but then also to not being able to take care of their child. Kimberly has done her best to reach out to the birth mom in situations where she can, especially the one. She's encouraged her to go on retreats and do all that she can to help get her life back in order.
That sounds incredible, the way that you've explained that to them. I can imagine there'd be maybe some obstacles and some things like that for understanding. How's that been?
No, I mean, like, that's all they've ever known, right? So they've grown up just like, we got to adopt you. They know the whole story. And we tell them, oh my goodness, we couldn't have a baby. And we were so heartbroken. And we just prayed and prayed and prayed and said, Jesus, like, please, we would love to have children. And it's like, and then God gave us you, so it's always like this joyful, happy excitement story. They love to hear their story. They love to hear how we got the call. We just kind of explain it as this beautiful story written by God. Like, God wrote our story, but we do tell them, this is really hard for your birth mom and your birth dad. It's like, we tell them, like, look, we get to be with you for all these milestones in your life. And so they do see the sadness at the beginning of the story. So we pray for their birth parents, and we always speak positively about their birth parents. And they have just a really great sense of thankfulness for their birth parents and this burden on their heart to pray for them.
So, Kate, as you went through the process of beginning the open adoption, what was that like for you?
Open adoption was really, I kind of felt like it was this foreign and crazy concept to me. I think I felt like I knew how to be a big sister. I knew how to show up, go back home and hang out with my siblings and, throw them up in the air and bring them really cool presents. And that was why I initially didn't plan on visiting, because I felt like I couldn't have that kind of role as a big sister and aunt to my own child who was being raised not as my child. So the openness of getting information, I felt like was really important, because there's just such a great void. So getting letters and pictures was really powerful for me. I visited for the first time when she was turning 4. And I remember I'd really been struggling with it. And I had friends who said, you have this opportunity to be a part of her life, as a 4-year-old. And you can be there. I think that decision ended up being really healthy for me. It was really challenging. It was really, really hard, but it was also really healing in the long run.
Well, you mentioned the healing aspect. I wanted to ask, how has the overall experience, do you think, changed you as a person?
I think it's completely changed me as a person. I think that healing from adoption is something, it's a process for birth parents. There's not a lot of discussion about the very similar pain that people feel who have placed a child for adoption. It's just to give birth to a child, like a beautiful child, and then hand that child off to strangers is something that breaks every sort of natural taboo that exists. If that wasn't completely against every human instinct that there is, then the human race would end. So to overcome that, I think there has to be some level of spiritual healing. Being a birth parent is something that is so unspoken. Nobody wants to talk about it. You can't see it. It's invisible. I think that it's a continual process and something that I'm still really interested in pursuing, how there can be more resources that exist, particularly in the Christian community, in the pro-life community, for people who have placed children for adoption.
Kimberly, so with your experience of adopting 4 children, there had to have been some unexpected experiences along the way. What are some of those?
When we got involved with fostering, we really thought of it as like we were fostering so we could adopt. So we first got to adopt Anthony, and that was very quick and surprising how quick it was. And then we adopted the twins, so suddenly I had 3 babies, and we were like, okay, wait, let's hold off just a few years and get our feet underneath us, because it was very overwhelming to have 3 babies. But by the time we were able to receive John Paul, our 4th, we were in a different place as far as more supportive of that concept of reunification. The whole goal of foster care is to reunify a child with their family, is to help that family get back on track so that they can take care of their child. And I think that was a surprise for us, that I was able to really develop a relationship with his birth mother and share with her her dignity and how much God loved her. We have this beautiful relationship with his birth mother. So I think that was a big surprise.
Kate, what are some of the challenges that you faced being a birth mother?
I think particularly perhaps the first decade after my daughter was born was really challenging. Once you've become a mother, you always are a mother. But after you place a child for adoption, you are never the mother to the child again. In order to make adoption work, someone else has to be fully and completely the mother of your child and the father of your child. I feel like I knew that as much as I could, but there's no way to truly understand the way that that is going to affect you. I remember going back into the world. I moved, and there's many opportunities that are available to you, obviously, when you're not parenting a child, but there's a real meaninglessness to that. So trying to find a way back to a life that felt meaningful in any way was a huge challenge for me in my early 20s. For me, engaging in art was something that was really powerful. So I started playing music when I was pregnant. I decided that playing that harp for an hour every day was something that I could do for my child and that I could do for myself. And I'm obviously holding the instrument right up against me. The first time I ever felt the baby kick was while I was playing the harp.
As Bridget has grown up and grown to be a young woman, what was it like for you to develop a mother-daughter relationship, even though it's a unique situation?
I mean, it's definitely different. I feel like we don't have a mother-daughter relationship. I mean, you're constantly living in that paradox of like, you're always a mother and never a mother. She definitely has a mother. She has a mom, and it's her mom who adopted her and raised her. We do have a really strong relationship. We're very similar. It's interesting. We have a ton of similar interests. We speak the same way. We kind of look the same way. On our trip, actually, this is crazy. We were going across the United States, and we stopped at the Grand Canyon. My 13-year-old was like, Mom, I really want to see the Grand Canyon. It was like sort of on our way enough. So we went to the Grand Canyon, and we made a purposeful trip there. We weren't sure when we were going to go, but we kind of fit it into this day, drove there. It was an hour and a half from where we were. And we were up above the canyon, and my husband's holding onto our 3-year-old. There's not really a ton of fencing at the Grand Canyon.
No, there's not.
Right. So he's holding onto our 3-year-old, and we're kind of corralling all of our children. We saw it. It was amazing. And this woman walked by me and was like, oh, you have a beautiful family. Look at all your kids. We also have a big family. It's so great to see you here. And she said, how many children do you have? And I said, 6. How many do you have? She also had 6. And then we said, yeah, we're heading across the country. We're going to a wedding. And she was like, oh, we're also going to a wedding. And in California, we looked at each other and we're like, wait, which wedding are you going to? They were going to the same wedding that we were going to. It was the aunt of the groom. Yeah. She also had 6 kids. And she was like, I saw you up there above the canyon, and you reminded me of Bridget. You guys sound the same. Like, our speaking voice is very similar. So yeah, I think it's been delightful to spend time with her and to get to know her and to do projects with her. And it's been a real gift to have her around.
As a couple, what message do you have for parents who may be considering adopting a child?
I think that it can feel like a very foreign experience. It can feel like the second best option. I would say now, like, absolutely no way. This is a calling. I don't feel like I could love my children any more than I do. I would say don't be afraid. That's like the big thing. Just start taking one step at a time.
Greg, I'd like you to share your advice for the adoptive father in this process. What would you tell him?
Like Kimberly said, I mean, first and foremost, you start with prayer. So after we've, reasonably discerned, then we should do something about it. God is speaking not only to us, but also through others. A lot of times I think guys are just reticent to do it because I think they have they're imagining in their head, like, this is, what my son or daughter, I want it to be. And again, it may be just caught up in that pride thing, like, well, I want my children to have these characteristics of myself and my spouse. Every child is a gift. And so even if they were your biological children, they can be radically different or very similar to you.
Thank you. Kate, what advice do you have for parents who are considering abortion?
So I think when you asked earlier about the surprises that have happened along the way, I could never, in that moment of complete fear and shock and horror when I found out I was pregnant, I could never have imagined how much more beautiful the world would become throughout this child being born into the world. The way that her life has changed her family and my family and so many people has been so, so very beautiful. Getting past the fear and the terror of what is going to happen after your world has ended is really challenging. But in the long run, what we keep coming back to is the fact that beauty arrives when least expected. God creates such extraordinary beauty in a way that we couldn't have imagined. I had no idea that would lead to me on a bright blue school bus with 6 kids, with my husband playing music together across the country. And my daughter, who I was pregnant with when I was 21, became an extraordinary musician. I mean, she's writing incredible songs. She started a band. She's creating such beautiful music. None of that music would exist if she didn't. So I think that knowing that there's so much hope, and the openness to life is the openness to beauty. I think that to love, particularly in a situation that's that terrifying, love will break your heart, but you should do it anyway.
Well said. Well said. Well, I'd like to thank you once again for participating in this program. Adoption is an issue that we just don't talk about enough.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, Brad, what a fantastic, a moving conversation that we've had today. I so greatly appreciate that we had the opportunity. This is kind of unique to sit down and see both sides, to talk to adoptive parents, to talk to birth parents, and really get the entire picture. And it's broadened my understanding of adoption quite a bit.
Well, yes. And if that's happened to you, then it's great that it's probably happening to all of you listeners who are taking in this podcast. We have all benefited from very wonderful pearls of wisdom from people, as you mentioned, on both sides of the adoption issue, but their experience and wisdom and advice to others who may be involved in a future adoption is absolutely priceless, I think.
Oh, it's beyond priceless. I want to encourage everyone, by the way, to head to our website, lifeissues.org, where we have resources related to today's program, including articles about adoption. We also have resources from Springs of Love, so you can find out more information there. And I want to encourage you, while you're at our website, lifeissues.org, to join the Life Defenders today. Be a daily part of our work to save babies and promote a culture of life across America. Giving monthly in any amount is a tremendous commitment to the pro-life movement. We can't all be sidewalk counselors, but we can all support vital pro-life education through a monthly donation. Monthly giving helps us reach more persuadable people with the pro-life message. Monthly giving enabled the creation of our new 30-minute radio program and this podcast. Help us do more for the babies by becoming a defender of life today. Again, you can easily sign up on our website, lifeissues.org. Be sure to tune in next time for more straight talk on life issues.